Good morning, class. For the next couple of weeks, we're going to focus on a World War II story that is found in your Scholastic Scope April 2020 magazine. It begins on page 4. The title is called Courage in a Time of Terror. This read aloud will be completed in 2 videos. But before we start the read aloud, let's get some background information and look at some of the text features. This young gal right here is Stefania. She is our main character. During World War II, she is an individual who protected and hid 13 Jewish civilians from the Germans. If you turn to page 6, you will see a map of Europe. World War II broke out when Germany invaded Poland and then invaded other countries. As you can tell from all the orange that on the map, those are the countries that the Axis controlled. The Axis included Germany and Japan, as well as some other countries. The Allies, which included the countries France, Great Britain, eventually the United States, and other countries, fought against the Axis. The goal of the Allies was to stop the German forces from taking control of the land, but also to stop them from killing millions of people. In this photograph, we see the German soldiers are ushering the Jewish community out of their homes. They are getting ready to board a train that will lead them either to concentration camps or to work camps. Please understand that the Jewish people were not the only group of people that were sent to these camps. When World War II ended, many of the cities or towns looked very similar to what you see at Warsaw, Poland. They laid in ruins. Many of the people came back or came out of hiding and rebuilt their beautiful towns. If you take a look at what some of these people endured, we'd probably say they are resilient. This story focuses on Stefania trying to hide 13 individuals. On page 9, you have the opportunity to read their bios. I realize that we don't speak Jewish or Polish or German, but please take the time to read about each individual after the videos. This will give you an idea of who some of these people are that were hiding and trying to survive during World War II. When they were hiding, Stefania protected them in the attic of this cottage. 13 people lived in this room for 2 years. They had to learn to be very quiet, because if they were discovered, their fate was in the German hands. At this time, please turn back to page 5 and we will read aloud the article. I will do the best I can in pronouncing the Polish and the Jewish words. Again, I'm going to do the best I can, and I'd like you to take a look at the words so that way you can get an idea of what they are, or even get maybe a better chance of pronouncing them than I am. So, it says, the incredible true story of a teenage girl named Stefania Podgorska who risked her life to save 13 Jewish men, women, and children from the Nazis. I do not know if you're aware, but the Nazis is a reference to a political group in Germany that Adolf Hitler was in charge of. So we continue. The train barreled through the bitterly cold autumn air. Max Demont, 27, did not know exactly where the train was carrying him, but he was certain the journey would end with his death. It was November 1942 in the country of Poland, and World War II was raging across Europe. Earlier that day, a group of Nazis had forced Max and dozens of other Jewish men, women, and children onto the train at gunpoint. The Nazis didn't tell them the train was going to a death camp, but Max had his suspicions. He knew what the Nazis were capable of. As Max saw it, he had two options: die at the hands of the Nazis or jump from the speeding train. He made his choice. With a pair of pliers hidden in his pocket, Max began feverishly cutting the barbed wire that covered one of the windows. When he made a hole large enough, he wiggled through. For a terrifying moment, Max clung to the side of the train with one hand. Wind whipped his hair and clothes. The clanging of the wheels on the metal tracks rang in his ears. And then he let go. Meanwhile, miles away in the city of Przemysl, 16-year-old Stefania Podgorska was also gripped by fear. She had no idea that her friend Max had been taken, or that his life was in imminent danger. What did she know was the most of her own family was gone, that her food and money were nearly depleted, and that it was up to her to keep herself and her 7-year-old sister Helena alive in a war-torn city. But Stefania would do more than protect her sister. She was about to become a lifeline for Max and 12 other Jewish people. She was about to risk everything to save them all. This next section, Fresh in the Air, is going to go back in history. It's going to tell us a little bit about what happened before World War II and at the beginning of World War II. Stefania was born in 1925 in the small village of Poland. She grew up on a farm. As a young girl, she longed to live in a big city. After Stefania's father passed away in 1938, her mother gave her permission to move to the nearby city of Przemysl with her older sisters. To Stefania, life in Przemysl was more thrilling than she could have imagined. She loved the cobblestone streets, the cafes that served gooey pastries, the shops that sold fancy dresses. She loved the energy of the city life, far from the noisy chickens on the farm back home. Stefania soon got a job in a grocery store owned by a kind-hearted woman named Mrs. Lee DeMont. It was there that Stefania first met Max, one of Mrs. DeMont's sons. Max, then 23, was studying to become a dentist. Max's parents treated Fusia, as they affectionately called Stefania, like part of the family. She ate dinner with them often and sometimes stayed in their cozy apartment. Like most Polish people at the time, Stefania was Catholic. The DeMonts were Jewish. No doubt Stefania picked up new words in Yiddish, a language spoken by Jews in Europe. Over time, she probably learned that chutzpah means courage, and that kavil is to practically faint with pride. She likely knew to say yes when Mrs. DeMont offered her a bissel more cake. But even in the cheerful warmth of the DeMonts' home, fear was in the air. As Jews, the DeMonts were part of a minority in Poland. Like people of all regions, Jewish people had their own unique rituals. For example, they worshipped in synagogues on Saturdays, not in churches on Sundays, as Christians did. Many non-Jewish people viewed such differences with mistrust and intolerance. For centuries, anti-Semitism, that is, prejudice against Jewish people, had smoldered in Poland and across Europe. Soon it would explode into an inferno of violence and death that nobody could have imagined. This word, anti-Semitism, is a word that we're going to look at for the next couple of weeks. We're going to take a look at what it means, which is a prejudice, and how it affected people. In Hitler's Vicious Lies, we're going to learn about Adolf Hitler and the Germans and what they did and why they did the actions they did. Next door to Poland was the country of Germany, and every day it was becoming more dangerous for Jewish people. In 1933, when Stefania was still a young girl living on the farm, Adolf Hitler became Germany's leader. At the time, Germany was still suffering from the humiliating defeat in World War I, which had ended in 1918. In the years since, the German people had endured growing poverty, unemployment, and hunger. Hitler and his Nazi party gave Germans someone to blame for these hardships: Jewish people. In hateful speeches, Hitler called the Jewish people pests and vermin and a virus, saying that they were not human. His vicious lies stirred up old prejudice. I wonder why Adolf Hitler and the Nazi party thought it was a good idea to blame what happened to Germany on the Jewish people. By 1938, when Stefania was working for the Demonts, life in Germany had grown unbearable for the Jewish people. Nazi laws had stripped them of their rights and dignity. Violent attacks had become common. Many feared far worse was coming. In 1939, Hitler and his armies began invading the countries of Europe, igniting World War II. One by one, Poland and other countries fell to the Nazis. By that time, Max leapt from the speeding train in 1942. Germany controlled much of Europe. At this time, like a prison, is where we come back to the beginning of our story, after Max has jumped off the train. When the Nazis took control of Przemysl, life for Max and his family changed overnight. In Poland, as in all Nazi-occupied countries, Jewish people were cast out from society. They were fired from their jobs, their possessions stolen. They were banned from schools, stores, and parks. They were even banned from sidewalks and made to walk in the gutters. I also know that if you were Jewish, you had to wear the Star of David to identify yourself when you were out in public. Stefania watched helplessly as the Demonts and all the Jewish people in Przemysl were ordered to move into a restricted area of the city called a ghetto. The ghetto was like a prison surrounded by a wall and patrolled by armed guards. No one was allowed to leave except to do forced labor. Max was forced to shovel coal for 12 hours a day with little more than dirty water, a drink, and moldy bread or wormy cabbage to eat. In the ghetto, people were starving. Diseases spread quickly. Max and his family grew increasingly sick, their clothes hanging from their thinning bodies, their faces turning gaunt. Stephanie worried constantly about the Demonts. She began smuggling food and supplies to them through a hole in the ghetto fence. Eggs, bread, anything she could get her hands on. She traded her finest clothes for food and became adept at sneaking past guards with rifles. Of course, she knew the risk. The penalty for helping a Jewish person was death. She did it anyway. At this time, please go to part 2 video to hear the rest of the story.